If you are curious to know more about the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, then this video is for you. Hey everyone, my name is Chloe. Welcome to my channel if you are new here, and welcome back if you have been here before. In this video, I am going to be talking about the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. I'm going to share a little bit about the author, give you a brief summary, and share my take on the book. So Rich Dad Poor Dad was written by author Robert Kiyosaki. He was born and raised in Hawaii and grew up to a middle-class family. He shares background about his dad, how his dad wasn't financially literate, but he was just one of those traditional people who knew job security, get a good education, go to work, and then retire and rely on, the benefits that you get from the government and from the job that you worked at for many years. Robert Kiyosaki is very passionate about teaching financial literacy. He's a businessman. He's also an author, obviously, but he just talks about why it's so important to be financially literate and why it is so important to teach this to your children, because a lot of the things that he shares in this book is something that you would probably never find in school, at least not the traditional school setting. The book is written almost in the form of like parables, because they're short stories that are shared throughout the book. And it almost feels like an autobiography of just Robert Kiyosaki sharing like little life stories and how these little things that he did or was exposed to led to where he is today. The book is broken up into 9 chapters. There's an introduction. There's chapter 1 where he's talking about how the rich don't work for money. The idea is that the rich learn how to make money work for them. And an interesting fact, I found out that the majority of people who are wealthy in the United States weren't born into it. It was something that they worked at and learned and grew and was able to build assets, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So in this book, Robert shares the perspective of 2 different fathers. That's why it's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So the rich dad is Robert Kiyosaki's best friend's father, and that man is not formally or traditionally educated, but he is very financially literate. He's a businessman, and he shares all kinds of knowledge and wisdom with Robert Kiyosaki and his own son, which is Robert Kiyosaki's friend in the book named Mike. Now, the poor father is Robert Kiyosaki's father, who, again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, grew up in a mindset of you work for somebody for the rest of your life, you rely on pension, 401k, like job security, and very much about getting a formal education, going to a university, college, getting your degree, and then getting a good job that will support you throughout your entire life and support your family. And so the other father, Mike's dad, which is the rich dad, shares a very different perspective. Like I said, he's a businessman and was more so focused on building assets and not having his time controlled by somebody else by going to a traditional like 9-to-5 job. So throughout a lot of the book, it shows a contrast in the conversations that Kiyosaki has with his own father, which is the poor dad, and the conversations that he has with his rich father, which is Mike's dad, his friend's dad. And it's very interesting to see the contrast in conversations and just the stories that he shares. And I do like that this book is written in the form of stories, because stories are easier to digest than just raw data. And so a lot of, I feel like, great leaders teach in stories, like Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, obviously Jesus Christ taught in parables. And the human mind is just a condition for us to be able to easily grasp stories than just hard facts. I do appreciate the hard facts, but I do really also enjoy that he wrote it in story form. So personally, I think it's a pretty easy read because it's written that way. He does share facts and some data. However, I think the overarching tone is very much like parable stories. My take on this book and my perspective, or how this book affected me, was it opened my eyes to see money in a very different light. I always looked at money as something I have to work towards to get, which is partially true or somewhat true. You do have to put in the time and the effort and the work, but I never really thought about money working for me. And so I feel like that this book opened my eyes to that, and it opened my eyes to assets and liabilities. And if you're not familiar with that is, a liability is something that is taking money from you, and assets is something that is adding money to you. For example, a dog is a liability. A dog is taking money from you. You take the dog to the vet, you have to get the dog food, all these things the dog needs, getting a bath, whatever it may be. You are spending money and there's no money being added. Now, the dog can become an asset if you are a breeder and you start breeding the dog, or if you have your dog on social media and your dog becomes social media famous and your dog starts making money, or some way, shape, or form where your dog is able to make money for you. That would be like an asset. And so an asset can be an investment. It could be you buying a business and owning the business, not necessarily you working in the business, but working on the business. You oversee things and you are gaining assets, gaining money, and you're gaining more money than you're losing. You're gaining more money than you're putting into the business. So you're profiting from it. And liabilities are things that you buy and they don't add any money back into your account. A car can be a liability. Now, a car can be an asset if you sell it, but generally I look at a car as like a liability. You can use the car to make money. So I feel like it just depends. A boat can be a liability, but then you can use the boat to make money. So it really just depends. But I feel like some things can be either assets or liabilities, just depending on how you are using it. So that's something that stood out to me. I got to learn a little bit more about how assets work, how liabilities work, and also look at life from the perspective of I don't necessarily have to work a traditional job in order to have some form of security. And I'm actually, after 2020, and even before 2020, but 2020 really put into perspective of how easy it is that a person can lose their job. And so I don't want to put that phrase that they say, don't put all your eggs in one basket, to only have one form of income, and that income being something that could leave any time is just something that I don't feel comfortable with. And if you all don't know, I am pregnant and this is our first baby, and I want to be in a place where we really feel secure and don't have to necessarily work, at least for me, not have to work unless I really want to. And since we're expecting a baby, I want to get to a place where we can teach her how to be financially free from having to work a traditional 9-to-5 job. I think that it's very important to have a job and learn how to, serve people and have responsibility. However, I think that you can learn that in many different ways outside of just working a traditional job. And Kiyosaki touches on those things. Another thing that stood out to me was his view on education. And he's very much about education and for education, but not in the traditional sense. He talks about how school basically breeds us to be ready for the workforce, but it doesn't really teach us about finance and how to save money, how to invest, how to have money work for us, and how to be an owner of a business. It teaches us how to be an employee. So that just kind of opened my eyes too, and gave me a new perspective on education. I'm college educated. I was always encouraged to go to college to get a degree. I have multiple degrees. However, looking at it now from this perspective, even though I'm glad that I have the multiple degrees, it's not something that I would encourage people to do necessarily unless they really felt like that in the thing that they needed to do or wanted to do, they had to have these degrees. But I think that getting a formal education sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes can be a waste of time and resources, with student loans being so high, with education costing way more than it did years ago. I think that Kiyosaki really helped me to see that you don't necessarily need to have a formal education in order to be wealthy or in order to be comfortable in your financial position. Because maybe not everybody wants to be wealthy, maybe not everybody wants to be rich, but I think most people want to live a pretty comfortable, kind of just good life where they are not living from paycheck to paycheck, And so, even though before I read the book, I already knew that you didn't need a college degree to live that way, but he really opened my eyes more to it, just showing the agenda, the hidden agenda that a formal education sometimes or oftentimes has. For me personally, it just opened my eyes to the job market and the education market and how almost they work together to, again, like I said before, prepare you on how to be an employee and prepare you on how to live almost like paycheck to paycheck, but not prepare you on how to save money, how to invest money, and how to be an owner of a business. So I think that this book does a really good job at that. Well, I really value that because being a Christian, I know that God is an investor and God invests in us. And he cares about how we take care of our money and how we're stewards over our money and how we give our money, share our money, how we use our money. And I think that it's just important to understand money. Some people think the phrase money is the root of all evil is true, but that's not true. That's incorrect. Money is not the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. And that's what it says in the Bible. And so I think that as Christians, if you are watching this video and you are a Christian, I think that it's important to not be scared to talk about money or scared to want to have more money or to be in a financially secure place, especially if you're like me and you're expecting a baby, or if you already have children, or even if you have grandchildren and you just want to be able to do more for your family or do things in life and live the kind of life that you believe that God has called you to live. I think that it's okay to have these types of conversations and talk about money and to want to have money. The problem comes when you love money and money becomes an idol and money becomes your God and you would do anything for money and you're almost like a slave to money. That's where it's an issue. But I think in general, money in itself is not evil. It's a blessing and it's a resource that God can use and help us and bless us and help other people and bless other people. So if you are interested in this book, I recommend checking it out. I will say that I would like to have seen more practical tips on how to get started with investing. His main recommendation is to learn on your own, go out, do research, find out more about finance. That's what he really encourages kind of near the end of the book is do your research, get educated about finance, find mentors, be mindful of the people who you hang around, just so that you can surround yourself with people who are going in a similar direction that you want to go when it comes to finance. If you've read this book before, please leave comments below and share your thoughts on the book, or if you're interested in reading it, or if you've read similar books to this before. I'd be curious to read and see what you guys got out of those types of books or what you got out of this book. So thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this video. And don't forget to click the notification bell so that you don't miss out on future videos. And I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.